You're going to represent our school whether you like it or not. Zariah Ellis felt the words hit her chest like a physical blow, even though she'd been expecting them. Standing in the pristine hallway of Westfield Preparatory Academy, surrounded by 5 of the most influential students in school, she realized this wasn't a request. It was a declaration of war disguised as school spirit. "I never said I wanted to compete in the academic decathlon," she replied quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. 3 weeks at this school, and already they'd found their target. Blake Brooks stepped closer, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "That's the beauty of it, Ellis. You don't get a choice. Mrs. Patterson already approved the roster change. Congratulations, you're our new representative." The hallway felt like it was closing in. Zariah's mind raced through the implications. The regional academic decathlon was in 10 days. The competition that determined which school would advance to nationals. The same competition that Westfield had won for the past 4 consecutive years. "Why me?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Chelsea Drake laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls. "Because you're so intellectual. All those books you carry around, sitting alone at lunch reading instead of socializing. We figured you must be dying for a chance to show off all that knowledge." The cruelty in Chelsea's voice was wrapped in false sweetness, but Zariah heard the real message underneath. "We're going to watch you fail publicly, and there's nothing you can do about it. Besides," Devon Sterling added, leaning against a locker with practiced indifference, "diversity looks good on our school's applications. The judges love seeing representation." There it was. The word that made Zariah's stomach clench with familiar shame and rage. In their minds, she wasn't a student, she was a checkbox. A way to make their elite institution look progressive while ensuring she'd fail spectacularly enough to prove their point about who really belonged here. The thing was, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Zariah had spent her entire life being underestimated. Teachers who spoke to her slowly, assuming she needed extra help. Guidance counselors who suggested more realistic career paths. Classmates who acted surprised when she knew the answers. She'd learned to let people make their assumptions while quietly excelling beyond their wildest expectations. But this felt different. This felt personal. "The competition covers 10 subjects," Blake continued, pulling out his phone to read from what was clearly a prepared script. "Mathematics, science, literature, history, fine arts, social science, economics, music, speech, and essay. Most students spend months preparing with coaches and tutors. You've got 10 days. Solo," Chelsea added with obvious delight. "Our usual team will be busy that weekend." Zariah's throat tightened. They weren't just setting her up to fail. They were ensuring she'd fail alone, without support, without preparation, without anyone in her corner. The perfect humiliation. "What if I refuse?" she asked, knowing it was pointless but needing to ask anyway. "Then you'll be violating your enrollment agreement," Devon said smoothly. "Westfield students are expected to participate fully in school activities when selected. Your scholarship specifically mentions academic competitions as a requirement for continued financial aid." The blood drained from Zariah's face. They'd done their homework. Her full-ride scholarship to Westfield was the only reason she could afford to attend this school where other kids' parents donated new libraries as tax write-offs. Without it, she'd be back at her overcrowded public school with outdated textbooks and broken dreams. They had her trapped, and they knew it. 10 days, Blake repeated, checking his expensive watch. "Hope you're ready to make Westfield proud." The group dispersed with satisfied smirks, leaving Zariah alone in the hallway that suddenly felt vast and empty. She stood there for a long moment, processing what had just happened, feeling the familiar weight of other people's expectations settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. But as the shock wore off, something else began to take its place. Something that had been building since the day she first walked through Westfield's imposing front doors and saw the portraits of past valedictorians. 97 faces, all the same shade of pale privilege. Determination. "Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description." Zariah walked slowly to her locker, her mind already shifting into a different gear. She'd been hiding her true capabilities since elementary school, learned that being too smart too quickly made people uncomfortable, made them suspicious, made them find ways to tear you down. But maybe it was time to stop hiding. She opened her locker and stared at the stack of books inside. Not the assigned textbooks that her classmates struggled through, but the advanced mathematics texts she'd been working through for fun. The philosophy books she read during lunch instead of socializing. The programming manuals she studied after finishing her homework in 20 minutes. Her classmates saw a quiet girl with second-hand clothes and a scholarship. They had no idea they were looking at someone who'd been reading college-level material since middle school, who'd taught herself calculus because her old school didn't offer it, who'd been accepted to 3 different summer programs for gifted students but couldn't afford to attend any of them. They thought they were throwing her to the wolves. They had no idea she was the wolf. As Zaria pulled out her phone to start researching academic decathlon preparation strategies, she noticed something that made her pause. A small piece of paper had been slipped through the vents of her locker. She unfolded it carefully. Asterisk, they don't know about MIT, do they? A friend asterisk. Zariah's heart stopped. MIT. The early admission letter she'd received last month. The full scholarship that was contingent on maintaining her GPA and demonstrating continued academic excellence. The secret she'd been keeping because she knew exactly how her classmates would react to learning that the diversity student had already been accepted to one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Someone knew. Someone had been watching her more carefully than she'd realized. But who? And more importantly, were they friend or enemy? The 10-day countdown had begun, but suddenly Zaria realized this competition wasn't just about academic knowledge. It was about power, perception, and the dangerous game of revealing just enough truth to change everything. She folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket. Whatever game Blake and his friends thought they were playing, they were about to discover they'd made a critical error in their calculations. They'd assumed she was powerless. They were about to learn the difference between being underestimated and being unstoppable. That evening, Zariah sat in the cramped apartment she shared with her grandmother, surrounded by library books and laptop screens glowing with research. The academic decathlon wasn't just any competition. It was an intellectual gladiator arena where the country's brightest students battled across 10 disciplines, and Westfield's team had been legendary for their preparation and ruthless efficiency. "Baby girl, you're gonna burn a hole in that computer screen," her grandmother Naya called from the kitchen, where she was preparing dinner after her double shift at the hospital. At 68, Naya Ellis still worked as a nurse's aide, her hands weathered from decades of caring for others, her back aching from long hours on her feet. "Just studying, Grandma," Zaria replied, not looking up from the screen displaying past academic decathlon questions. Mathematics, polynomial equations that would make most high school students weep. Science, quantum physics principles that some college students struggled with. Literature, analysis of obscure 18th century poets. She could solve every single one. Studying for what? You never told me about any test. Zariah's fingers paused over the keyboard. How could she explain that she'd been selected as human sacrifice for her school's academic reputation? That her classmates had decided to use her as entertainment, expecting her to fail publicly and prove their assumptions about people who looked like her? "Academic competition," she said simply. Naya appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her dark eyes sharp with concern. "What kind of competition? And why do you look like somebody died?" The thing about Naya Ellis was that she'd raised Zaria since she was 7 years old, after Zariah's parents died in a car accident. She'd given up her own dreams of nursing school to work double shifts and keep food on the table. She'd sat with Zaria through countless nights of homework, never understanding the advanced concepts but always believing her granddaughter could master anything. Most importantly, she could read Zaria like her favorite worn Bible. "They want me to represent the school," Zaria sighed carefully. "It's an honor." "Uh-huh." Naya settled into the chair across from her, the same way she'd done every night for 11 years. "And this honor got you looking like you swallowed poison because..." Zaria closed her laptop and really looked at her grandmother for the first time that day. Naya was still wearing her hospital scrubs, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes. She'd sacrificed everything to make sure Zaria had opportunities she'd never had. "They don't think I can win," Zaria sighed quietly. "Do you think you can win?" The question hung in the air between them. Zaria had been asking herself the same thing, but not in the way her grandmother meant. The real question wasn't whether she could win, it was whether she should let herself win. "I could," she admitted. "I could win the whole thing." Naya smiled, the expression transforming her tired face. "Then what's the problem? If I win, everything changes. People will start paying attention, asking questions. Zariah's voice dropped to a whisper. What if they find out about MIT? Her grandmother's expression shifted to something fiercer. Baby, what if they do? Before Zaria called answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Coffee shop on Henderson Street. Tomorrow 7 a.m. Come alone. Your friend with the note. Zariah stared at the message, her heart rate spiking. Someone was watching her, knew her schedule, had access to her personal information. In any other situation, she'd delete the message and report it. But something about the careful phrasing, the reference to the note, made her hesitate. Who's that? Naya asked, noticing her expression. Just someone from school. The next morning, Zariah arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, her mind cataloging every detail. Small local business, multiple exits, enough ambient noise to mask conversation, strategic corner table with clear sightlines. She'd read enough thriller novels to know basic surveillance awareness, though she'd never expected to need it. At exactly 7 o'clock, someone slid into the seat across from her. Zariah's breath caught. It was Zoe Louis, one of the most respected CNAs at Westfield. Student body president, captain of the debate team, daughter of 2 Harvard professors. Everything Zariah was supposed to aspire to be. Before you ask, Zoe said quietly, yes, I've been watching you. And yes, I know about MIT. Zariah's coffee cup trembled in her hands. How? Because I helped review scholarship applications for the diversity committee last year. Your file crossed my desk. Zoe leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. Your SAT scores were off the charts. Your essay about using mathematics to model social inequality was brilliant. And your recommendation letters read like love songs from teachers who'd never seen anything like you. The words should have been flattering, but they felt like an invasion. Zariah had spent so much energy staying invisible, and now she was learning that the most powerful student in school had been studying her like a specimen. Why are you telling me this? Zoe glanced around the coffee shop, then back to Zariah with an expression that was part admiration, part concern. Because Blake Brooke and his friends aren't just trying to humiliate you. They are trying to destroy the entire diversity scholarship program. Zariah's blood turned to ice. What do you mean? Think about it. They force the scholarship student into an impossible competition with no preparation. When you fail spectacularly, they'll use it as evidence that the diversity program is lowering academic standards. That students who don't come from traditional backgrounds can't compete at Westfield's level. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. This wasn't just personal cruelty, it was systematic sabotage. Blake's father was on the school board. Chelsea's mother was the head of the parent association. Devon's family had donated the new science wing. They had the power to end the scholarship program entirely, and they were using her as the ammunition. There are 12 other kids on diversity scholarships, Zaria whispered. If the program gets cut, they all lose their chance, Zoe finished, including 3 middle schoolers who are supposed to start here next year. Zariah felt sick. She'd been so focused on her own humiliation that she hadn't considered the larger implications. Her failure wouldn't just affect her. It would close the door for other students who looked like her, who came from families like hers, who needed this opportunity to change their entire family's trajectory. But here's what they don't know, Zoe continued, sliding a thick folder across the table. I've been preparing for this moment since the day I read your file. Academic decathlon preparation materials, study guides, practice questions from the past 5 years. Everything you need to not just compete, but to dominate. Zaria stared at the folder like it might explode. Why would you help me? Because I was you, 3 years ago. Zoe's voice carried the weight of shared experience. Different circumstances, same game. They tried to break me too. The difference is, I had resources and connections. You don't. But you have something else. What? You're brilliant enough to make them regret underestimating you for the rest of their lives. Zariah opened the folder and saw months of meticulous preparation. Study schedules, practice tests, strategic analysis of judge preferences, even psychological profiles of the students she'd be competing against from other schools. This wasn't just help, it was a masterclass in academic warfare. There's one condition, Zoe said as Zaria flipped through the materials. Here it comes, Zariah thought. The catch. The price for help that seemed too good to be true. You have to promise me something, Zoe continued. When you win, and you will win if you follow that plan, you can't hide anymore. No more pretending to be less than you are. No more letting people underestimate you because it feels safer. Zarya looked up from the folder to meet Zoe's intense gaze. What if I don't want to be a symbol? What if I just want to be a normal student? Then you're going to lose, Zoe said simply. Because this competition isn't about knowledge anymore. It's about whether you're willing to fight for your right to be here. For everyone's right to be here. The words hit Zarya like a physical blow, because she recognized the truth in them. She'd spent so long trying to blend in, to avoid confrontation, to let her work speak for itself quietly. But sometimes the world forced you to speak loudly or lose your voice entirely. I'll think about it, Zarya said, closing the folder. You have until tonight, Zoe replied, standing to leave. Because tomorrow, Blake and his friends are going to announce your participation to the whole school. They are planning to make it a big spectacle, pep rally, school newspaper article, the works. Maximum audience for your maximum humiliation. As Zoe walked away, Zarya sat alone with the folder that represented everything she'd been afraid to want. Recognition. Respect. The chance to show the world who she really was instead of who they expected her to be. But it also represented everything she'd been afraid to lose. Safety. Anonymity. The comfortable obscurity that had protected her from the kind of attention that could destroy everything her grandmother had sacrificed to build. Her phone buzzed with another message from an unknown number. Asterisk saw you with Zoe. Interesting choice of allies. Be careful who you trust. Some people collect diversity students like trophies. Someone who knows asterisk. Zarya's hands shook as she read the text. Someone else was watching. Someone who knew about her meeting with Zoe. Someone who was suggesting that her new ally might have her own agenda. In the span of 24 hours, she'd gone from invisible scholarship student to the center of a web of competing interests, hidden agendas, and conflicting advice. The academic decathlon was still 9 days away, but the real competition, for her loyalty, her trust, and her future, had already begun. And she was starting to realize that everyone who claimed to be helping her might be playing a completely different game. The pep rally happened exactly as Zoe had predicted, but worse. Zarya stood in the back of the packed gymnasium, watching Blake Brooke command the microphone like he was born for it. The entire student body of Westfield Preparatory filled the bleachers, their voices echoing off the vaulted ceiling in waves of manufactured enthusiasm. And now, Blake announced, his voice carrying perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system, I'm proud to introduce Westfield's newest academic decathlon representative. Someone who embodies the diversity and intellectual curiosity that makes our school special. Zarya's stomach dropped as a spotlight swung across the crowd, searching for her face. She'd hoped to slip out before this moment, but the gymnasium doors had been locked for safety reasons once the assembly began. Now she was trapped, watching her anonymity die in real time. Zarya Ellis, come on down. The spotlight found her, and 1,500 pairs of eyes turned in her direction. The applause was polite but confused. Most students had no idea who she was. She was the scholarship girl who ate lunch alone, who never spoke in class unless directly asked, who walked the halls like a ghost. But she could see the satisfaction in Blake's face, the calculated cruelty in Chelsea's smile, the way Devon was already recording with his phone to capture her humiliation for posterity. Come on, Zarya, Blake called again, his voice carrying mock encouragement. Don't be shy. Your school is counting on you. This was it. The point of no return. She could refuse, make a scene, storm out of the gymnasium and accept the consequences to her scholarship. Or she could walk down those steps, take that microphone, and commit herself to a battle she wasn't sure she could win. The choice was made for her when she felt a gentle hand on her back. Go, whispered a voice beside her. She turned to see Spencer Rivera, a junior she'd noticed in her advanced literature class but never spoken to. He was tall, mixed Latino and black, with intense dark eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that came from being genuinely secure in yourself. You've got this. Something in his voice, the certainty and warmth, gave her the courage to move. Zarya walked down the gymnasium steps, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat, feeling the weight of every gaze tracking her movement. When she reached the gymnasium floor, Blake handed her the microphone with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tell everyone how excited you are to represent Westfield, he murmured, too low for the crowd to hear. Zarya took the microphone, her hands steadier than she'd expected. She looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some already dismissive. In the faculty section, she spotted Mrs. Patterson, the academic decathlon coordinator, watching with obvious concern. I'm honored to represent Westfield, Zarya sighed, her voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium. And I promise to give everything I have to bring home another championship. The words surprised her as they came out. She'd meant to say something safe, something humble. Instead, she'd made a promise that bordered on arrogant. A promise that would haunt her if she failed. The applause was louder this time, but she could hear the undertone of doubt. Who was this girl to promise championships? What made her think she could compete with schools that had teams, coaches, resources? As she handed the microphone back to Blake, she caught sight of someone in the crowd that made her blood freeze. Her grandmother, still in her hospital scrubs, sitting in the parents' section with tears in her eyes. Naya had left work early to watch her granddaughter's moment of recognition. She'd probably lied to her supervisor, risked a write-up, maybe even her job, to be here for what she thought was Zariah's triumph. She had no idea she was watching her granddaughter being led to slaughter. After the pep rally, Zariah found herself surrounded by a crowd she'd never experienced before. Students who'd never acknowledged her existence were suddenly offering congratulations, asking questions, treating her like someone who mattered. "I didn't know you were so academic," said Cynthia Kim, a popular senior who'd literally looked through Zariah like she was invisible for 3 weeks. "You're so brave taking this on solo," added Trevor Wilson, whose main claim to fame was dating 3 different cheerleaders simultaneously. The attention felt surreal and nauseating. These people weren't celebrating her. They were celebrating their own guilt-free entertainment. They'd watch her fail and feel good about having been supportive beforehand. But then Spencer appeared at her elbow, somehow materializing through the crowd without seeming to push or force his way through. "You need some air," he said quietly, and it wasn't a question. He guided her toward a side exit, past clusters of students still buzzing about the assembly. Outside, the late afternoon air was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the gymnasium. "That was intense," Spencer said, leaning against the brick wall of the science building. "That was a setup," Zariah replied, surprised by her own honesty. She'd spent so long keeping her thoughts to herself that speaking freely felt foreign. Spencer studied her with those dark eyes, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. "Yeah, I figured that out around the time Blake started smiling like he'd won the lottery." "You know Blake?" "I know his type." Spencer's voice carried a weight that suggested personal experience. Rich kids who think the world is their personal playground and everyone else is just entertainment. Something in his tone made Zariah look at him more carefully. She realized she'd been so focused on staying invisible that she'd never really noticed him before, but now she saw the details. Designer jeans that looked expensive but weren't quite the right brands for Westfield's elite. A scholarship student trying to blend in, just like her. "Are you? Diversity scholarship?" "Yeah." Spencer's smile was rueful. "Academic merit plus adds to the cultural richness of our community." "Sound familiar?" The recognition hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't the only one. She'd been so isolated, so focused on her own survival, that she'd never considered there might be others navigating the same impossible balance. "How many of us are there?" she asked. 15 total. 12 currently enrolled, 3 incoming next year. Spencer pulled out his phone and showed her a group text chain she'd never known existed. "We try to look out for each other, but most of us stay under the radar." Zariah scrolled through the messages, seeing names she recognized but had never connected to her own experience. Students who sat alone at lunch, who spoke carefully in class, who wore their intelligence like a secret shame. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this?" "Because you made it clear you wanted to be left alone," Spencer said gently. "We respected that. But after today," he gestured toward the gymnasium, "you can't fly solo anymore." Before Zariah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Blake. "Hope you're ready for the spotlight, superstar. Channel 7 wants to do a feature story about Westfield's inspiring diversity champion. Interview tomorrow at 3 p.m. Don't disappoint. The blood drained from her face. "They are bringing in the media." Spencer read the message over her shoulder, his expression darkening. "Shit. They are not just setting you up to fail privately. They want it documented." "I can't." Zariah's voice cracked. "My grandmother saw the pep rally. She thinks this is an honor. If I fail on television..." "You won't fail," Spencer said with unexpected intensity. "You don't know that." "I know you," he said, and the way he said it made her heart skip. "I've been watching you in class for weeks. You finish reading assignments before the teacher stops talking. You work through calculus problems during lunch like they are crossword puzzles. You're not just smart, Zariah. You're brilliant." The words hit her like a physical caress. When was the last time someone had seen her, really seen her, and found something worthy of admiration instead of suspicion? But brilliant isn't enough, she whispered. They have resources, preparation, coaches. I have 9 days and a folder from someone I'm not sure I can trust. You have more than that, Spencer said. You have us. He showed her the group text again, but this time she noticed something she'd missed before. The messages weren't just casual check-ins, they were strategic communications. Study groups, resource sharing, emotional support networks. The scholarship students had created their own underground system for survival. We've all been waiting for someone to take a stand, Spencer continued. Someone with the courage to show them what we're really capable of. Maybe this is your moment. What if I don't want a moment? Zarya asked. What if I just want to graduate quietly and go to college? Spencer stepped closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne, something subtle and warm that made her hyper-aware of his proximity. Then they win. Not just against you, but against everyone who comes after you. The weight of his words settled over her like a physical thing. She thought about the 3 middle schoolers who were supposed to start at Westfield next year. About the 12 current scholarship students who would lose their opportunities if the program got cut. About her grandmother, who worked double shifts to pay for the small things that the scholarship didn't cover. About herself, and the dreams she'd been too afraid to voice out loud. There's something else, Spencer said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Something you need to know about Blake and his friends. What? They are not just trying to destroy the diversity program. They are trying to prove that their own mediocrity is excellence by eliminating the competition. Zarya frowned. What do you mean? Spencer glanced around to make sure they were alone, then continued. Blake's been rejected from Yale twice. Early decision and regular admission. Chelsea's Stanford application was waitlisted and then denied. Devon's been turned down by Harvard, Princeton, and MIT. The revelation hit Zarya like a lightning bolt. MIT. They all applied to MIT. None of them got in. Spencer's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. But someone in our school did. Someone they don't know about yet. Her secret hung in the air between them, and Zarya realized that Spencer knew. Somehow, he knew about her early admission letter, her full scholarship, her acceptance to the same dream school that had rejected the 3 most privileged students at Westfield. How did you? Because I got into Stanford, he said quietly. And when you're a scholarship kid who achieves something like that, you start paying attention to who else might be carrying the same secret. The ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. Spencer wasn't just another scholarship student, he was her intellectual equal, someone who understood the impossible balance of hiding your brilliance while fighting for your dreams. And he was looking at her like she was the most fascinating puzzle he'd ever encountered. What happens when they find out? She whispered. That depends, Spencer said, stepping even closer, on whether you're ready to stop being their victim and start being their worst nightmare. Before she could respond, Zarya's phone exploded with notifications. The group text chain was lighting up with messages from the other scholarship students, but these weren't supportive congratulations. They were warnings. Asterisk, they're targeting all of us now. Zoe asterisk. Asterisk, Blake's father called an emergency school board meeting. Jessica asterisk. Asterisk, Channel 7 wants to interview other diversity students too. Dan asterisk. Asterisk, this isn't just about Zarya anymore. Carmen asterisk. The cascading consequences were already beginning. By forcing her into the spotlight, Blake had inadvertently exposed the entire network of scholarship students. Now they were all vulnerable, all targets, all dependent on her success or failure. Zarya looked at Spencer, seeing her own fear reflected in his eyes. I've made everything worse. No, he said firmly. You've made everything real. The question is, what are you going to do about it? As if summoned by his words, Blake appeared around the corner of the building, flanked by Chelsea and Devon. His smile was sharp with triumph as he approached. There's our champion, he called out. Ready for your close-up tomorrow? Channel 7 is very excited to meet Westfield's inspiring diversity success story. The way he said diversity made it sound like a disease. Hope you've been studying, Chelsea added sweetly. The whole state will be watching when you compete. No pressure. They walked away laughing, leaving Zarya and Spencer alone with the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow's interview would cement her commitment publicly. There would be no backing out, no quiet withdrawal, no return to anonymity. In 9 days, she would face the academic decathlon with the eyes of her community on her, the future of the scholarship program in her hands, and the secret of her MIT acceptance burning like a coal in her chest. But as Spencer reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both protective and electric, she realized something that surprised her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't facing the impossible alone. The war had been declared, the battle lines drawn, and the stakes raised beyond anything she'd imagined. But maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to fight. The Channel 7 interview was scheduled for 3 p.m., but by noon, Zariah's world had already exploded. She sat in the empty journalism classroom, staring at her laptop screen in horror. Someone had leaked her MIT acceptance letter to the school newspaper. Not just leaked it, published it with a headline that made her stomach churn. Scholarship student's secret. Did affirmative action give her unfair advantage? The article was a masterpiece of calculated poison. It praised her remarkable achievement while systematically undermining it with questions about fairness, merit, and whether diversity programs created unequal playing fields. Every compliment came wrapped in doubt, every celebration tainted with resentment. How did they get this? Spencer asked, reading over her shoulder. He'd found her hiding in the empty classroom, skipping lunch like she'd been doing since the pep rally. I don't know. Zariah's voice was barely a whisper. I never told anyone except my grandmother. The letter's been in my bedroom drawer since October. Spencer's expression darkened as he continued reading. This isn't just about your acceptance. They are using it to question every scholarship student's achievements. Look at this paragraph. Zariah forced herself to read the section that made her feel physically sick. Ellis's acceptance to MIT raises questions about the real qualifications of Westfield's diversity scholarship recipients. If a student can gain admission to one of the world's most prestigious universities while keeping it secret from classmates and teachers, what does that suggest about the transparency of college admissions processes? They are making it sound like I cheated, she whispered. They are making it sound like we all cheated, Spencer corrected grimly. Every scholarship student in this school is going to be under scrutiny now. As if summoned by his words, Zariah's phone buzzed with messages from the scholarship student group chat. The texts came in rapid succession, each one more panicked than the last. Jessica. Parents are asking if I really earned my grades. Dan. My college counselor wants to review my applications. Carmen. 3 teachers asked me about additional support I've been receiving. Zoe. Emergency meeting. Library. Now. Zariah looked at Spencer, seeing her own fear reflected in his eyes. This is exactly what Blake wanted. Now everyone's questioning whether we belong here. It gets worse, Spencer said, pulling up something on his phone. Check the school's social media. The comments on Westfield's Instagram post about the academic decathlon were brutal. Parents questioning the school's academic standards. Alumni threatening to withdraw donations. Current students sharing concerns about fairness and merit. Each comment was a dagger aimed at the scholarship program's heart. We need to get to that meeting, Zariah sighed. But as they stood to leave, the classroom door opened. Mrs. Patterson entered, followed by Principal Danson and 2 people Zariah did recognize. A woman in an expensive suit and a man with a press badge. Miss Ellis, Principal Danson said, his usually warm demeanor replaced by something cautious and strained. These are representatives from the Channel 7 News team. They'd like to move your interview up. The woman in the suit stepped forward with a smile that felt predatory. Miss Ellis, I'm Janet Martinez from Channel 7 News. We're so excited to tell your inspiring story. But her eyes were cold, calculating, and Zariah realized with growing horror that this wasn't going to be the puff piece she'd expected. This was going to be an interrogation. We have some additional questions we'd like to explore, the reporter continued. About your background, your achievements, and the opportunities you've been given here at Westfield. The way she said opportunities made it clear this wasn't about celebrating success, it was about exposing what they saw as unfair advantages. I don't think, Spencer started, but Principal Danson cut him off. Mr. Rivera, you can wait outside. Spencer looked at Zariah, his eyes communicating a silent message. Don't do this alone. But she nodded toward the door. Whatever was coming, she couldn't drag him down with her. As Spencer reluctantly left, the adults arranged themselves around Zariah like a tribunal. The camera operator set up his equipment while the reporter reviewed her notes, each rustle of paper feeling like a countdown to execution. Let's start with your MIT acceptance, Janet Martinez said once the camera was rolling. That's quite an achievement for any student. Can you walk us through the application process? The question seemed innocent enough, but Zaria could hear the trap hidden underneath. They wanted her to either downplay her achievements or sound arrogant defending them. Either way, she'd lose. I worked hard and was fortunate to be accepted, she said carefully. Fortunate, the reporter repeated, emphasizing the word. Some people might say it was more than fortune. Can you tell us about the support systems you've had access to through Westfield's diversity program? There it was. The suggestion that her success wasn't really hers, that she'd had unfair help, that her achievements were tainted by the color of her skin and the size of her bank account. The scholarship program gave me the opportunity to attend Westfield, Zaria replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Everything else, my grades, my test scores, my applications, those came from my own work. Of course, Janet said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But critics of affirmative action programs argue that these initiatives, while well-intentioned, can create situations where qualified students lose opportunities to less qualified candidates who meet certain demographic criteria. How do you respond to that? The question hit Zaria like a physical blow. They weren't just questioning her achievements, they were asking her to defend her right to exist in spaces that had never been meant for people like her. But as she opened her mouth to respond, something shifted inside her. Maybe it was thinking about her grandmother working double shifts to afford her school supplies. Maybe it was remembering the 3 middle schoolers who were supposed to start at Westfield next year. Maybe it was the memory of Spencer's hand in hers, his absolute faith in her abilities. Or maybe it was just that she was tired of being apologetic for being exceptional. I think, Zaria sighed, looking directly into the camera, that people who make those arguments are confusing diversity with lack of qualifications. I have a 4.0 GPA. I scored in the 99th percentile on the SAT. I've taught myself calculus and quantum physics because I was curious. I didn't get into MIT because of my demographics. I got in because I'm brilliant. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Brilliant. Not smart, not accomplished, not hardworking. Brilliant. A word that black girls weren't supposed to claim for themselves, especially not on television. Janet Martinez's eyebrows shot up. That's quite a confident statement. It's not confidence, Zaria replied. It's fact. And in 8 days, I'm going to prove it by winning the academic decathlon. Not because of any program or initiative or helping hand, but because I'm the smartest person in the room. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, but Zaria knew that those 30 seconds would be the only part that mattered. She'd thrown down a gauntlet that she couldn't take back, made promises she wasn't sure she could keep, claimed a level of excellence that would make her a target for everyone who wanted to see her fail. But she'd also told the truth for the first time in her life. When the interview finally ended, Zaria walked out of the classroom on shaking legs to find Spencer waiting in the hallway, along with half the scholarship students from the group chat. We saw it, Jessica said, her eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and terror. The whole thing was live-streamed on the school's website. You called yourself brilliant on television, Dan added, sounding awed. I don't think I've ever heard anyone our age say that word about themselves. Because we're not supposed to, Carmen said quietly. We're supposed to be grateful and humble and never, ever act like we know how smart we are. Spencer stepped closer to Zaria, his voice low and intense. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most dangerous. Probably both, Zaria admitted. Zoe appeared at the end of the hallway, walking toward them with quick, determined steps. When she reached the group, her expression was grim. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Blake's father called another emergency school board meeting for tonight. They are using your interview as evidence that the scholarship program is creating entitled students who don't understand their place. Zaria felt the ground shift beneath her feet. My place. Their words, not mine, Zoe said quickly. But the damage is done. 3 board members who were neutral on the scholarship program are now questioning whether it's creating the right kind of school culture. What does that mean? Spencer asked. It means they are going to vote on whether to suspend the program pending a full review, Zoe replied. Which is academic speak for killing it slowly so no one can accuse us of being racist. The scholarship students exchanged panicked glances. Suspension meant no new scholarships next year. Review meant months of scrutiny, investigation, and bureaucratic delays. Even if the program survived, it would be so weakened that it might never recover. There's more, Zoe continued. Someone leaked the group chat to the administration. They know you've all been coordinating, sharing resources, supporting each other. They are calling it academic collusion. Zariah's blood turned to ice. Academic collusion was a serious charge that could result in suspension or expulsion. They were taking the scholarship students' greatest strength, their community, and weaponizing it against them. Who leaked it? Spencer demanded. I don't know, Zoe said. But whoever it was had access to private messages going back months. Zariah's phone buzzed with another anonymous text. Asterisk, the Queen has shown her true colors. Interesting how she knew exactly when to distance herself from her pawns. Check her college applications. Someone who knows asterisk. Zaria stood at the message, her mind racing. The anonymous texter was suggesting that Zoe had betrayed them, but that made no sense. Zoe was the one helping her, providing study materials, warning her about Blake's plans. Unless, Zoe, Zaria sighed carefully, what colleges did you apply to? Something flickered across Zoe's face, too quick to interpret but too obvious to miss. Why does that matter? Because someone seems to think it's important. Zoe glanced around at the circle of scholarship students, all watching her with growing suspicion. I applied to several schools. Harvard, Yale, Princeton. The usual suspects. What about MIT? Spencer asked, his voice sharp with sudden understanding. The silence stretched for several heartbeats too long. I was waitlisted, Zoe said finally. The admission hit the group like a physical blow. Zoe Louis, the perfect student, the academic superstar, the girl who had everything handed to her on a silver platter, had been waitlisted at the same school that had accepted Zaria with a full scholarship. When did you find out? Zaria asked, though she was starting to suspect she knew the answer. 2 weeks ago, Zoe whispered. 2 weeks ago. Right around the time Blake and his friends had decided to force Zaria into the academic decathlon. Right around the time someone had started slipping anonymous notes into her locker. Right around the time Zoe had appeared with her perfectly prepared study materials and her convenient warnings about Blake's plans. You've been playing both sides, Spencer said, his voice heavy with realization. No, Zoe protested. I've been trying to help. You've been trying to control, Zaria interrupted, the pieces clicking together with devastating clarity. You knew about my MIT acceptance before you approached me. You knew Blake was planning something. You probably even suggested I be the target. Zoe's face crumpled. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? Carmen demanded. I thought if you failed quietly, it would show that even the most qualified scholarship students couldn't compete at the highest level. It would prove that diversity programs need better support systems, more resources. I was going to use it to argue for expanded mentorship programs. Programs you would run, Jessica said flatly. I was trying to help the scholarship students. Zoe protested. By sabotaging one of them. Spencer's voice was ice cold. By setting Zaria up to fail so you could swoop in as the savior. Zaria felt something break inside her chest. Zoe's help hadn't been altruistic, it had been calculating. The study materials, the warnings, the strategic advice, all of it designed to ensure Zaria would fail in exactly the right way to serve Zoe's larger agenda. The anonymous texts, Zaria sighed quietly. That was you too. Zoe nodded miserably. I was trying to warn you about the other players. To help you see the bigger picture. The bigger picture where I'm your sacrificial lamb, Zaria replied. The scholarship students began backing away from Zoe, their expressions ranging from disgust to betrayal. She'd positioned herself as their ally while orchestrating their downfall, collecting them like chess pieces in a game they didn't even know they were playing. I never wanted you to get hurt, Zoe said desperately. I just wanted to create change. You wanted to create change that put you in charge, Spencer corrected. You wanted to be the white savior who fixed the diversity problem. I'm not white, Zoe protested weakly. No, Zaria sighed, understanding flooding through her. But you're not on scholarship either. You're not one of us. You never were. The truth hung in the air between them. Zoe was Asian American, which technically made her a minority, but she was also the daughter of Harvard professors, wealthy, connected, and privileged in ways that the scholarship students could never be. She'd appropriated their struggle while never having to live it. The board meeting is in 3 hours, Zoe said, making one last desperate attempt to maintain control. If we don't have a unified strategy. We don't have anything, Zaria sighed firmly. You're not part of we anymore. As Zoe walked away, her shoulders slumped in defeat, the scholarship students stood in stunned silence. They'd lost their most powerful ally, discovered that their community had been compromised, and learned that even their support systems could be weapons against them. What do we do now? Dan asked. Zaria looked around at the faces of her fellow scholarship students, brilliant, determined, terrified young people who'd been caught in a war they never wanted to fight. Then she looked at Spencer, whose eyes held steady faith in her despite everything that had just been revealed. Now we stop playing other people's games, she said, and we start playing our own. In 7 days, she would face the academic decathlon with no allies except the scholarship students, no preparation except what she could accomplish on her own, and no safety net except her own brilliance. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she knew exactly who her enemies were, and more importantly, she knew who her friends were too. The emergency school board meeting was held in Westfield's main conference room, a sterile space with floor-to-ceiling windows that normally showcased the campus's manicured grounds. Tonight, those windows felt like a fishbowl, exposing everyone inside to scrutiny from the protesters gathering on the lawn. Zaria sat in the back row with the other scholarship students, watching board members file in with expressions ranging from uncomfortable to openly hostile. Blake's father, Robert Brooke, commanded the head of the table like a general preparing for war. His expensive suit and practiced smile couldn't hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. Before we begin, Principal Danson announced, I want to remind everyone that this is a closed session to discuss personnel and program matters. No recording devices, no social media, no. Actually, Robert Brooke interrupted smoothly. Channel 7 has requested permission to observe tonight's proceedings. Given the public interest in this matter, I think transparency is important. Zariah's blood turned to ice as Janet Martinez entered the room with her camera crew. This wasn't just about the scholarship program anymore. It was being turned into public theater, with the scholarship students as unwilling performers in their own humiliation. The first item on our agenda, Brooke continued, consulting his notes with obvious satisfaction, is a comprehensive review of our diversity scholarship program in light of recent concerns about academic integrity and institutional culture. He clicked a remote, and a presentation screen descended from the ceiling. The first slide made Zariah's heart stop. Academic discrepancies in scholarship student performance. The slides that followed were a systematic assassination of every scholarship student's achievements. Test score progressions that supposedly showed unusual improvement patterns. Grade point averages that exceeded statistical expectations. College acceptance rates that were disproportionate to historical norms. What you're seeing, Brooke explained to the camera as much as the board, is a pattern that suggests these students may have received inappropriate assistance or accommodations that weren't available to our general student population. Jessica grabbed Zariah's arm, her fingernails digging into skin. They are saying we cheated, she whispered. But it was worse than that. Brooke wasn't just questioning their achievements. He was presenting data that made their success look statistically impossible unless they'd had unfair advantages. Take Miss Ellis, for example, Brooke continued, and Zariah's face appeared on the presentation screen. Her SAT scores showed a 340-point improvement from sophomore to junior year. Her GPA jumped from 3.2 to 4.0 over the same period. And somehow, despite keeping her MIT acceptance secret from teachers and counselors, she managed to craft an application impressive enough to earn a full scholarship. The implications hung in the air like poison gas. Either Zariah was a fraud, or the scholarship program was systematically cheating to inflate minority students' achievements. Furthermore, Brooke clicked to the next slide. We've discovered that scholarship students have been operating an organized network to share test answers, homework solutions, and exam strategies. What they call mutual support, we might call academic collusion. Screenshots of the group chat appeared on screen, but they'd been edited to look damning. Messages about study groups had been stripped of context to look like cheating conspiracies. Offers to help with homework appeared to be illicit assistance arrangements. Zariah felt sick. Everything that had made the scholarship students strong, their community, their mutual support, their refusal to let each other fail alone, was being twisted into evidence of corruption. I think we need to hear from the students themselves, said Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, one of the few board members who'd seemed sympathetic to the scholarship program. Miss Ellis, would you like to respond to these allegations? Zariah stood on shaking legs, aware that every word she spoke was being recorded for public consumption. Mr. Brooks' data is misleading, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. My test scores improved because I had access to better resources at Westfield. My grades improved because I was finally being challenged at an appropriate level. And my MIT acceptance had nothing to do with any program. It was based on my own merit. Interesting, Brooke replied, clicking to another slide. Because MIT's admissions office has some questions about that. Zariah's world tilted sideways. On the screen was an email from MIT's undergraduate admissions office, dated that morning, *re, Zariah Ellis, request for application review *. It seems, Brooke continued with obvious satisfaction, that MIT received an anonymous tip suggesting Miss Ellis's application contained false information. They are conducting a full review of her admission status. The room spun around Zariah. Someone had contacted MIT directly, sabotaging her acceptance with allegations that could destroy everything she'd worked for. Even if the review found no wrongdoing, the process could take months, long enough to defer her enrollment and potentially cost her the scholarship. Who sent the tip? Spencer demanded, rising from his seat beside her. Brooke's smile was sharp as a blade. I'm afraid that information is confidential. But I understand it came from someone with intimate knowledge of Miss Ellis's academic history. Zariah's mind raced through the possibilities. Zoe. Blake. One of the teachers. The anonymous texter who'd been watching her every move. There's more, Brooke continued relentlessly. We've also discovered some interesting connections that suggest this scholarship program may have been compromised from the beginning. The next slide made Zariah's knees buckle. It was a photograph of Spencer at what appeared to be a family gathering, standing next to a woman who looked exactly like him. But it wasn't the family resemblance that made Zariah's blood freeze, it was the woman's name tag visible in the photo. Dr. Sophia Rivera Brooke, educational consultant. Brooke. Spencer was related to Blake's father. Meet my daughter-in-law, Robert Brooke announced casually. Dr. Sophia Rivera Brooke, who happens to be one of the educational consultants who designed Westfield's diversity scholarship program 5 years ago. The room erupted in murmurs, but all Zariah could hear was the sound of her own heart breaking. Spencer turned toward her, his face pale with panic, but she couldn't process his expression through the wave of betrayal crashing over her. Dr. Rivera Brooke has been concerned about the program's direction for some time, Brooke continued. She's shared those concerns with her family, including her stepson Spencer, who has been providing valuable insights into the scholarship student community. Spencer was on his feet now, his voice desperate. It's not what it sounds like. But Zariah was already backing away from him, pieces clicking together with devastating clarity. Spencer's knowledge of the scholarship students. His convenient appearance whenever she needed support. His intimate understanding of Blake's plans and motivations. He'd been reporting back to Blake's family the entire time. Zariah, please. Spencer reached for her, but she jerked away from his touch like it burned. Miss Ellis, Dr. Hawthorne called out. Do you have anything to say about these revelations? Zariah looked around the room, at the hostile board members, at the rolling camera, at her fellow scholarship students who were staring at her with expressions ranging from sympathy to suspicion. Some of them were probably wondering if she'd known about Spencer's connection, if she'd been part of the deception. She thought about her grandmother, who was working a night shift at the hospital and had no idea her granddaughter's future was being dissected on live television. About the 3 middle schoolers who would never get their chance at Westfield. About the dreams that were being systematically destroyed in the name of academic integrity. I have something to say, Zariah sighed, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. The room fell silent. You're all so worried about whether I deserve my achievements that you've never asked whether I deserve to be treated like a human being. Her voice grew stronger with each word. You've spent weeks setting traps, gathering evidence, building cases against teenagers whose only crime was being excellent while black and brown and poor. Miss Ellis, Principal Danson warned. No, Zariah cut him off. I'm talking now. You want to question my MIT acceptance? Fine. You want to investigate my test scores? Go ahead. You want to dismantle the scholarship program because it threatens your mediocre children's sense of entitlement? Do what you have to do. She turned to face the camera directly, addressing not just the room but everyone watching at home. But when you're done destroying everything we've built, when you're satisfied that you've put us back in our place, remember this moment. Remember that you looked at brilliant students and saw threats instead of assets. Remember that you chose to tear down instead of lift up. Remember that when the history of this school is written, this is the night you decided that excellence was only acceptable when it came in the right color. The silence in the room was deafening. Zariah grabbed her backpack and walked toward the door, her fellow scholarship students falling in behind her like soldiers following their general into battle. As they reached the exit, She turned back one last time. Oh, and Mr. Brooke. The academic decathlon is in 6 days. I'll be there, representing Westfield whether you like it or not. And when I win, not if, when, I want you to remember exactly how hard you tried to stop me. The door slammed behind them with the finality of a war declaration. Outside in the parking lot, the scholarship students gathered around Zariah like survivors of a shipwreck. The protesters had grown to nearly 50 people, parents and community members holding signs demanding academic integrity and fair admissions. They are going to destroy all of us, Dan said, his voice hollow with despair. They already have, Carmen replied. Even if we graduate, even if we get into college, there will always be questions. Always doubts. Zariah looked at Spencer, who stood apart from the group, his face etched with guilt and something that might have been love. How long? She asked quietly. How long what? How long have you been spying on us? Spencer flinched like she'd slapped him. It wasn't spying. My stepmother asked me to keep an eye on the scholarship students because she was worried about the program's sustainability. She thought if we could identify problems early. You mean if you could identify us as problems early? Jessica interrupted coldly. No, Spencer said desperately. It wasn't like that. At first, maybe, but then I got to know you all. I saw how brilliant you are, how hard you work. I stopped reporting back months ago. When? Zariah demanded. Spencer's voice dropped to a whisper. The day I realized I was falling in love with you. The words hit her like a physical blow. Even now, even after everything, she could feel the pull toward him, the desire to believe that his feelings were real despite everything else being a lie. It doesn't matter, she said, as much to herself as to him. You were part of their plan from the beginning. Everything that happened. Not everything, Spencer said urgently. My feelings for you, the way I feel when we're together, the way you make me want to be better, none of that was fake. How would I know? Zariah asked, and the pain in her voice surprised even her. How would I ever know what's real with you? Before Spencer could answer, Zariah's phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. Asterisk baby, are you okay? Mrs. Johnson from down the hall saw you on the news. Coming to get you now. Asterisk. The thought of her grandmother's worried face, of having to explain this nightmare to the woman who'd sacrificed everything for her education, was more than Zariah could bear. I need to go, she said to the group. Zariah, Carmen called out as she started walking away. What do we do now? Zariah stopped without turning around. She thought about the academic decathlon, 6 days away. About her MIT acceptance hanging in the balance. About the scholarship program that would be dismantled if she failed. About the middle schoolers who would never get their chance. About proving that she was everything they said she couldn't be. Now we get ready for war, she said. Because in 6 days, I'm going to show them exactly what they are trying to destroy. As she walked away from the school that had become a battlefield, leaving behind the boy who'd broken her heart and the community that had become her family, Zariah realized that she'd never felt more alone or more determined in her life. They'd taken everything from her except the one thing that mattered most, her brilliant, unstoppable mind, and in 6 days, that would be enough. Zariah found her grandmother collapsed on the kitchen floor at 11:47 p.m. She'd driven home in numb silence after the board meeting, her mind cycling through the wreckage of her life like a broken record. MIT under review. Scholarship program destroyed. Spencer's betrayal. The academic decathlon looming like an execution date. But nothing had prepared her for the sight of Nia Ellis crumpled beside the refrigerator, her hospital scrubs twisted around her small frame, her breathing shallow and labored. Grandma. Zariah dropped to her knees, checking for injuries, feeling for a pulse. Nia's skin was clammy and pale, her eyes unfocused when they fluttered open. Baby, Nia whispered, her voice barely audible. I was trying to, the news said. Don't talk, Zariah sighed, already dialing 911 with shaking fingers. Just breathe. I'm here. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes that felt like hours. As paramedics loaded Nia onto a stretcher, one of them pulled Zariah aside. Has she been under unusual stress lately? The EMT asked. Zariah looked at her grandmother's pale face, thinking about the news coverage, the phone calls from worried neighbors, the weight of watching her granddaughter be publicly torn apart on television. Yes, she whispered. Blood pressure spike, the EMT explained. Common in elderly patients dealing with family crisis. We're taking her to County General for observation. As the ambulance pulled away with its cargo of red lights and broken dreams, Zariah stood alone in her driveway, finally understanding the true cost of her defiance. County General Hospital at midnight was a fluorescent-lit purgatory of waiting and worry. Zariah sat in the emergency room, still wearing the dress she'd chosen for the board meeting, now wrinkled and stained with tears she didn't remember crying. Her phone had been buzzing constantly, calls from Jessica and Carmen, text messages from other scholarship students, even 3 missed calls from Spencer that she'd ignored. But she couldn't focus on anything except the image of her grandmother's unconscious face. "Miss Ellis." A tired-looking doctor approached, her scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. "I'm Dr. Kim. Your grandmother is stable, but we need to talk." Zariah followed her to a quiet corner, bracing herself for more devastating news. "Mrs. Ellis suffered a hypertensive crisis," Dr. Kim explained. "Her blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels, likely triggered by acute stress. We've got it under control now, but she's going to need significant lifestyle changes. No more double shifts, no more high-stress situations, careful monitoring of her diet and medications." The words hit Zariah like physical blows. No more double shifts meant half the income. Careful monitoring meant expensive medications and regular doctor visits. High-stress situations meant Zariah Coulden T put her grandmother through any more public battles. "How long will she need to stay here?" Zariah asked. "At least 3 days for observation. Maybe longer if there are complications." Dr. Kim's expression softened. "Miss Ellis, your grandmother is 68 years old and has been working herself to exhaustion. Her body is telling her to slow down, and she needs to listen." After the doctor left, Zariah sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, listening to the beep of monitors that had become the soundtrack to her worst fears coming true. This was what her defiance had cost. Not just her own future, but her grandmother's health. Every time she'd stood up to Blake and his friends, every moment she'd chosen pride over prudence, she'd been gambling with the most precious thing in her life. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Asterisk heard about your grandmother. Withdraw from the competition and we'll make sure her medical bills are covered. Your choice. A friend asterisk." Zariah stewed at the message until the words blurred. Even now, even at her lowest moment, they were still playing games. Offering help with one hand while holding a knife in the other. But the terrifying thing was how tempting the offer seemed. Her grandmother's insurance wouldn't cover everything. The missed work, the medications, the follow-up care, it would bankrupt them. Unless, "You look like hell." Zariah turned to see Spencer standing in the doorway, his hair disheveled, his eyes red with exhaustion. Despite everything, her treacherous heart skipped at the sight of him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Carmen told me what happened." He stepped into the room cautiously, like she might bolt if he moved too quickly. "I came to see if you needed anything." "I need you to leave." Spencer flinched but didn't retreat. "Zariah, please. Let me explain." "Explain what?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, and she glanced anxiously at her grandmother's sleeping form. "Explain how you've been spying on me since the day we met. Explain how every conversation, every moment we shared was part of some elaborate surveillance operation." "That's not true," Spencer said desperately. "Yes, my stepmother asked me to keep an eye on the scholarship students. Yes, I reported back to her in the beginning. But everything between us, everything I felt. How would I know?" Zariah interrupted. "How would I ever know what was real and what was performance?" Spencer moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because I'm here. At midnight, in a hospital, when there's nothing left to gain from pretending. Because I stopped reporting back to Sophia months ago, and she's furious with me. Because I told Blake to go to hell when he asked me to sabotage your study group." Zariah looked at him, really looked, and saw exhaustion that matched her own, guilt that seemed to be eating him alive, and something in his eyes that looked suspiciously like love. But she also saw the boy who'd had access to all her vulnerabilities, who'd known exactly how to gain her trust, who'd been perfectly positioned to destroy her from the inside. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. "Even if your feelings were real, the foundation was rotten. Everything we built was on a lie. So we build something new," Spencer said urgently. "Something honest. Something real." Before Zariah could respond, her phone rang. Principal Danson's name appeared on the screen, and she answered with a growing sense of dread. "Miss Ellis," his voice was carefully neutral. "I'm calling to inform you that the school board has voted to suspend your participation in the academic decathlon pending the resolution of the MIT investigation." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You can't do that." "I'm afraid we can." Given the questions about your academic record and the ongoing investigation, the board feels it's inappropriate for you to represent Westfield until these matters are resolved. The competition is in 5 days, Zaria sighed desperately. Blake Brooke will be taking your place. He's been preparing as an alternate. Of course he had. This had been Blake's plan all along, not just to humiliate her, but to replace her entirely. To prove that when the scholarship student failed, Brooke was ready to step in and save the day. What about the other scholarship students? She asked. The board has voted to suspend the entire program pending a comprehensive review. Current students will be allowed to finish the academic year, but no new scholarships will be awarded. Zaria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 12 other students' futures crushing down on her shoulders. When does this take effect? Immediately. The line went dead, leaving Zaria staring at her phone in the dim hospital room. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd sacrificed, had been for nothing. Worse than nothing. Her defiance had destroyed the very program she'd been trying to protect. What did they say? Spencer asked quietly. It's over, Zaria whispered. They won. She looked at her grandmother's peaceful face, thinking about the woman who'd given up her own dreams to make sure Zaria could pursue hers. About the debt they were already drowning in. About the medical bills that would keep coming for months. About the text message offering to make it all go away if she just surrendered. I need you to leave, she said to Spencer, her voice hollow. Zaria. Please. She couldn't look at him anymore, couldn't bear to see the concern in his eyes when she was about to do something that would destroy whatever respect he might still have for her. Just go. Spencer hesitated for a long moment, then leaned down and kissed the top of her head with infinite gentleness. I love you, he whispered. Whatever you're thinking of doing, remember that someone loves you exactly as you are. After he left, Zaria sat alone in the silence broken only by medical equipment and her own ragged breathing. She pulled out her phone and stared at the anonymous message, her finger hovering over the reply button. Outside the hospital window, the city slept peacefully, unaware that one brilliant girl was about to sacrifice everything she'd ever wanted to save the person who mattered most. But as she started to type her surrender, another message appeared. This one from Carmen. * emergency scholarship student meeting tomorrow. Library. We have a plan. *. Zaria stewed at the message, confusion cutting through her despair. A plan? What plan could possibly matter now when the program was already dead and she'd been banned from the competition? Her phone buzzed again, this time from Jessica. * Don't give up. We're not done fighting. *. Then Dan. * They think they've won. They are wrong. *. Then more messages, from scholarship students whose names she barely knew but whose determination burned through the screen like fire. As Zaria read message after message of defiance, something stirred in her chest that she'd thought was dead forever. Not hope. She wasn't ready for hope yet. But something harder and more dangerous. The desire for one last battle, even if it destroyed her in the process. She looked at her grandmother's sleeping face, at the monitors tracking her fragile health, at the reality of bills and debt and impossible choices. Then she deleted the anonymous message without responding and typed a reply to Carmen instead. * I'll be there. * If she was going down, she was going down fighting. But first, she was going to make sure the people who'd destroyed her remembered her name for the rest of their lives. The library meeting the next morning felt like a gathering of revolutionaries planning their final stand. 11 scholarship students sat in a circle among the dusty stacks, their faces bearing the weight of shared defeat and stubborn determination. Carmen had called them together, but it was Jessica who spoke first, her usually quiet voice carrying new steel. They think it's over, she said. They think they've broken us. But there's something they don't know. She pulled out a thick folder and spread its contents across the table. Academic records, financial documents, email printouts. A paper trail that made Zariah's breath catch. I've been doing research, Jessica continued. My mom works in the district office, and she helped me access some public records. Blake Brooke, Chelsea Drake, Devon Sterling, their academic histories are interesting. Dan leaned forward. Interesting how? Blake's been caught cheating twice. Once in sophomore year chemistry, once in junior year calculus. Both times, his father made substantial donations to the school, and the incidents disappeared from his record. Zaria felt something cold and sharp settling in her chest. What kind of donations? New chemistry lab equipment. Updated calculus curriculum. Total value, about $50,000 each time. Carmen picked up another document. Chelsea's even better. Her SAT scores magically improved by 400 points after her second attempt. The same week her mother's consulting firm got a contract to redesign the school's testing protocols. And Devon, added Spencer's voice from behind them. Everyone turned to see him standing at the edge of their circle, his face grim with determination and something that looked like resolve. "What are you doing here?" Carmen demanded. "Bringing you the missing piece," Spencer replied, setting down a flash drive. "Devon Sterling has been selling exam answers for 2 years. I have recordings, bank records, everything. My stepmother discovered it during her review of the scholarship program, but Robert Brooke buried the investigation." Zaria stood at him, her heart warring with her mind. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because I'm done being part of their system," Spencer said simply. "Because what they did to you, what they are doing to all of you, is wrong. And because sometimes you have to choose between loyalty to your family and loyalty to what's right." Jessica gathered the documents with trembling hands. "This is enough to destroy them. Their college applications, their reputations, everything." "But we can't use it," Zaria sighed quietly. "What?" Dan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "This proves they're the real cheaters. This clears us completely. And destroys any chance of the scholarship program ever being reinstated," Zaria explained. "If we go public with this, we become the students who brought down Westfield's golden children out of spite. We'll be labeled as vindictive troublemakers who can't be trusted in elite institutions." The harsh truth settled over the group like a shroud. Even with evidence of their enemies' crimes, they couldn't use it without confirming every stereotype about angry, resentful diversity students. "So what do we do?" Carmen asked. Before anyone could answer, Principal Danson appeared at the library entrance, flanked by 2 security guards. "Miss Ellis," he called out, "you need to come with us." Zariah's blood turned to ice. "Why?" "MIT has concluded their investigation," Danson said, his expression unreadable. "They want to speak with you immediately." The walk to the principal's office felt like a death march. The scholarship students followed behind her, a silent procession of witnesses to what might be her final humiliation. Inside Danson's office, a woman in an expensive suit sat across from his desk, her laptop open, her expression professionally neutral. "Miss Ellis," Danson said, "this is Dr. Jennifer Walsh from MIT's admissions office." Dr. Walsh stood and offered her hand, which Zaria shook with fingers that felt like ice. "Miss Ellis, I flew in from Boston to speak with you personally about the allegations we received." "And?" Zariah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "We've completed our review of your application and supporting materials," Dr. Walsh continued. "We've spoken with your teachers, verified your test scores, examined your essays, and cross-referenced everything with your academic record." The pause stretched for an eternity. "The allegations were completely unfounded," Dr. Walsh said finally. "Your acceptance stands, as does your scholarship. In fact, I wanted to meet you personally because your application was one of the most impressive we've received in years." Relief flooded through Zaria so powerfully she had to grip the chair to stay upright. But before she could fully process the good news, Dr. Walsh continued. "However, there is one condition we need to discuss." Of course there was. MIT has certain standards regarding public conduct and institutional representation, Dr. Walsh explained carefully. "While we support our students' right to advocacy and social justice, we expect them to engage in these activities with maturity and discretion." Zaria felt the trap closing around her. "What does that mean?" "It means that your recent media appearances and public statements have raised some concerns among our faculty and administration. The interview where you called yourself brilliant and promised to destroy your competition was problematic." The words hit Zaria like physical blows. Even her moment of honesty, her refusal to diminish herself, was being used against her. "We're prepared to honor your acceptance," Dr. Walsh continued, "provided you agree to certain conditions. No further media appearances, no public statements about this situation, and a commitment to representing MIT with appropriate humility and grace." Zaria understood perfectly. MIT wanted her brilliance, but they wanted it packaged in acceptable humility. They wanted her excellence, but only if she promised to never again claim it out loud. "What if I refuse?" she asked. Dr. Walsh's smile was perfectly professional and utterly cold. "Then we would consider your admission status under our character and conduct review policy. These policies give us considerable flexibility in our enrollment decisions." The threat was clear: submit or lose everything. "I need time to think," Zaria sighed. "Of course. Take all the time you need," Dr. Walsh replied. I fly back to Boston tonight. I'll need your decision by 6 p.m. As Dr. Walsh left, Zaria sank into the chair, the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her. Behind her, the scholarship students had heard every word. They want you to disappear, Carmen said quietly. To go to MIT and pretend none of this ever happened. While the scholarship program stays dead and Blake gets away with everything, Jessica added. Spencer stepped forward, his voice intense with emotion. You don't have to choose. There's another way. What way? Zaria asked, though she was afraid she already knew. You compete anyway, he said. You show up at the academic decathlon tomorrow, whether they want you there or not. You prove you're the best student Westfield has ever produced. You force them to acknowledge what they are throwing away. I've been banned, Zaria reminded him, by the school board. But the competition is hosted by the state education department. If you register independently as an unaffiliated competitor, they can't stop you. Dan was already pulling up information on his phone. He's right. State rules allow independent competitors in emergency situations. If Westfield's official representative can't compete, an alternate can be registered up to 24 hours before the event. Zaria felt her heart racing. But if I do that, if I defy MIT's conditions, they'll revoke my acceptance. Maybe, Spencer said. Or maybe they'll realize they can't afford to lose someone like you. That's a hell of a gamble, Carmen pointed out. Everything worth fighting for is, Spencer replied, his eyes locked on Zariah. The question is, what kind of person do you want to be? Someone who hides her brilliance to make other people comfortable, or someone who demands the world make room for her truth? Zaria looked around at the faces of her fellow scholarship students, brilliant young people who'd been systematically undermined and dismissed, whose futures hung in the balance of her decision. She thought about her grandmother, recovering in a hospital bed, who'd taught her that dignity was worth any sacrifice. About the 3 middle schoolers who would never get their chance if the scholarship program died. About Blake Brooke, probably already celebrating his victory. About herself, and the choice between safety and truth that would define the rest of her life. There's something else, Jessica said quietly. If you compete independently and win, the state education department would have to investigate why Westfield banned their strongest student. The attention might force them to reinstate the scholarship program. Or it might destroy any chance of that ever happening, Zaria pointed out. It's already destroyed, Dan said. They made show of that. This is about something bigger now. Spencer stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that somehow carried more power than shouting. I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you. I know I broke your trust. But I'm asking anyway, don't let them silence you. Don't let them convince you to be less than you are. Zaria looked into his eyes and saw not the calculating spy she'd discovered, but the boy who'd risked everything to bring her evidence against his own family. Who'd chosen truth over loyalty, justice over comfort. If I do this, she said slowly, I lose MIT. I lose my future. I lose everything I've worked for. No, Spencer said firmly. If you do this, you become yourself. Completely, unapologetically yourself. And the world will have to deal with that. Zaria thought about the anonymous text offering to pay her grandmother's medical bills in exchange for surrender. About Dr. Walsh's perfectly reasonable demands for humility and silence. About all the ways the world had offered to make her life easier if she would just agree to be smaller. She pulled out her phone and began typing. *2, MIT admissions. From Zaria Ellis. Subject, character and conduct. Dr. Walsh. Thank you for clarifying MIT's expectations. However, I must respectfully decline to accept conditions that require me to apologize for my excellence or promise to hide my capabilities. I am brilliant. I am unashamed of that fact. And I refuse to pretend otherwise to make anyone more comfortable. If MIT wishes to revoke my acceptance because I won't diminish myself for their comfort, then MIT was never the place for me. I'll be competing in the academic decathlon tomorrow as an independent competitor. When I win, I hope you'll remember that you had the chance to claim me as your own. Sincerely, Zaria Ellis *. She hit send before she could change her mind, then looked up at the faces around her. Scholarship students who'd become her family, a boy who'd chosen love over loyalty, and her own reflection in the window, finally unafraid to meet her own eyes. Let's go win this thing, she said. The war was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, Zaria felt like she was fighting for the right side. Her own. The Jefferson Convention Center buzzed with the controlled chaos of academic warfare. 12 high schools from across the state had gathered for the regional academic decathlon. Their teams clustered around prep tables like armies before battle. Zaria stood alone at registration table 13, marked independent competitor, feeling the weight of every curious stare. She'd spent the previous night in her grandmother's hospital room, cramming 16 hours of final preparation into 8, her study materials spread across the tray table while Naya slept peacefully. Her grandmother had awakened just before dawn, taken one look at Zariah's determined face, and smiled. "That's my girl," she'd whispered. "Show them what Ellis women are made of." Now, wearing the same black dress she'd worn to the board meeting, her armor of choice, Zaria checked in with competition officials who clearly had no idea what to make of her situation. "You're representing yourself?" the volunteer asked, confused. "I'm representing everyone who's ever been told they don't belong," Zaria replied. Across the convention center, she could see the Westfield team huddled around Blake Brooke, who wore his confidence like expensive cologne. Chelsea and Devon flanked him, their matching blazers and practiced smiles radiating the kind of privilege that expected victory as a birthright. But something was wrong with the picture. Blake kept checking his phone, his expression growing more agitated with each glance. Chelsea was fidgeting with her note cards in a way that suggested panic rather than preparation. And Devon looked terrified. "Zariah!" She turned to see the most beautiful sight she'd witnessed in days, all 11 scholarship students from Westfield walking toward her in formation, each wearing their finest clothes like war paint. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Supporting our champion," Carmen said simply. "The school might have banned you from their team, but they can't stop us from being your cheering section." Jessica stepped forward with a folder thick with documents. "Also, we brought insurance." "What do you mean?" "We filed a formal complaint with the state education department this morning," Dan explained. "Detailed allegations of academic misconduct, financial impropriety, and discrimination against scholarship students." Zaria felt her heart skip. "You used the evidence." "We used some of it," Spencer said, appearing at her elbow with his own thick folder. "Enough to trigger an investigation. The rest we're holding in reserve." She looked at him, really looked, and saw exhaustion that matched her own, determination that burned like fire, and love that refused to be hidden anymore. "I thought you were staying away," she said quietly. "I tried," he admitted. "Lasted about 12 hours before I realized I'd rather fight beside you than live safely without you." Before Zaria could respond, a commotion erupted across the convention center. Blake Brooke was shouting at someone on his phone, his perfect composure cracking like a broken mask. "What do you mean the account is frozen?" His voice carried across the room. "My father said." He stopped mid-sentence as he noticed everyone staring, his face flushing red with embarrassment and rage. But it was the expression on Chelsea's face that made Zariah's blood freeze, not confusion or concern, but satisfaction. "Ladies and gentlemen," the moderator's voice echoed through the convention center. "The regional academic decathlon will begin in 10 minutes. Competitors, please take your positions." As teams moved toward their assigned stations, Zaria found herself isolated at position 13, facing a panel of judges who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The setup was designed for humiliation, one student against 12 teams, no backup, no support system. "Perfect. Miss Ellis," the head judge announced, consulting her clipboard with obvious confusion. "As an independent competitor, you'll be participating in all 10 categories. Are you prepared?" "I've been preparing my entire life," Zaria replied. The first round was mathematics. Advanced calculus problems that made several team members visibly sweat. Zaria solved each equation with the fluid grace of someone who'd been working through differential equations for fun since middle school. Science came next. Quantum physics, molecular biology, environmental chemistry. Questions that required not just memorization but deep understanding of complex systems. Zaria fielded each one like she was having a casual conversation about the weather. By the third round, literature, murmurs were rippling through the convention center. Word was spreading that the independent competitor wasn't just surviving, she was dominating. "Miss Ellis," the literature judge announced, "please analyze the thematic significance of the green light in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby and its relationship to the American dream narrative." Zaria smiled. This was the question she'd been born to answer. "The green light represents the fundamental contradiction of American meritocracy," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "It promises that anyone can achieve anything through hard work and determination, while simultaneously ensuring that the light remains forever out of reach for those not born to privilege. Gatsby's pursuit of the light isn't just about Daisy. It's about the cruel mathematics of a system that demands you believe in opportunities it never intends to provide. The silence that followed was deafening. She continued through history, fine arts, social science, each answer demonstrating not just knowledge but the kind of synthesized understanding that came from a mind capable of connecting disparate concepts across disciplines. But it was during the economics round that everything changed. "Miss Ellis," the judge announced, "please explain the concept of market manipulation and its potential impact on educational funding systems." Zaria paused, something clicking in her mind. Market manipulation. Educational funding. She thought about Blake's phone call, about the frozen accounts, about Chelsea's satisfied expression. Market manipulation, she said slowly, her mind racing, occurs when individuals or entities artificially influence market prices for personal gain. In educational contexts, this might involve manipulating funding allocation, grant distributions, or even academic outcomes to benefit specific parties. As she spoke, pieces began falling into place with devastating clarity. Robert Brooks Construction Company. The contracts for Westfield's new facilities. The donations that made Blake's cheating incidents disappear. The scholarship program that had been designed by Sophia Rivera Brooke. For example, Zaria continued, her voice growing stronger. Someone might design a diversity program specifically to fail, creating a market opportunity for alternative funding mechanisms that they control. Chelsea Drake's face had gone white. Or they might manipulate academic competitions to ensure specific outcomes that justify predetermined policy changes, Zaria added, looking directly at the Westfield team. Blake Brooke was staring at her like she'd just spoken in tongues, but Chelsea was backing toward the exit, her composure finally cracking completely. The final rounds, music, speech, and essay, passed in a blur of perfect scores and stunned silence. When the last question was answered, the convention center felt suspended in time, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the head judge announced, consulting her scorecard with obvious disbelief, "we have the preliminary results." The scores were read in ascending order. 12 schools, their totals announced to polite applause. And then, in first place, with a perfect score across all 10 categories, independent competitor Zaria Ellis. The eruption of applause was deafening, but Zaria barely heard it. She was watching Chelsea Drake slip out a side exit, her phone pressed to her ear, her face twisted with panic. "Excuse me," Zaria said to the judges, "but I need to make an emergency call." She dialed Jessica's number, her heart pounding. "Jess, I need you to check something." "Chelsea Drake's family company. What kind of business are they in?" "Educational consulting," Jessica replied. "They specialize in diversity program assessment and, oh my God." "What?" "Zaria. They just landed $1 million contract to design reformed scholarship programs for 3 different school districts. Programs that would replace need-based scholarships with merit-based character assessments." The final piece clicked into place. Chelsea hadn't been Blake's sidekick, she'd been the architect. Her family's consulting firm stood to make millions if they could prove that diversity programs were flawed and needed to be replaced with their proprietary assessment systems. "How long has this contract been in development?" Zaria asked. "According to the public records, 6 months. Right around the time they started targeting you." Zaria looked across the convention center to where Blake stood surrounded by reporters, his perfect smile looking increasingly strained as he fielded questions about how he'd been defeated so completely by a student his school had deemed unqualified. But Chelsea was nowhere to be seen. Spencer appeared at her side, his own phone in hand. "Sophia just called," he said, his voice grim. "She's been investigating the scholarship program finances. Someone's been skimming money from the diversity fund to pay for consulting contracts." "Let me guess," Zaria sighed. "Drake Educational Consulting." "How did you?" "Because I just figured out who's been playing chess while we've been playing checkers." Before Spencer could respond, Principal Danson appeared, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Miss Ellis," Danson said, his voice carefully neutral. "These gentlemen are from the State Education Department. They'd like to speak with you about your complaint against Westfield." "And would like to speak with Miss Drake," one of the men added, "but she seems to have left the premises." Zaria smiled, feeling the pieces of justice finally clicking into place. "I might know where to find her." As they walked across the convention center, Past teams packing up their materials and parents celebrating their children's achievements, Zaria felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: peace. Not the peace of surrender, but the peace of truth finally being allowed to breathe. Behind her, the scholarship students followed like a devoted army. Beside her, Spencer matched her pace with the steady presence of someone who'd chosen love over loyalty, truth over comfort. Ahead of her lay consequences she couldn't predict and futures she couldn't control. But for the first time in her life, Zaria Ellis was walking forward as exactly who she was: brilliant, unashamed, and unstoppable. The game was finally over, and she had won it by refusing to play by anyone else's rules. The war wasn't finished. There would be investigations, hearings, consequences for everyone involved. But the battle for her own soul, for her right to be brilliant out loud, for her refusal to apologize for excellence, that victory was complete. As she led the investigators toward the truth that would unravel everything, Zaria realized that winning had never been about the competition at all. It had been about becoming someone worthy of her own respect, and that transformation was irreversible. 3 months later, Zaria stood in the same hallway where Blake Brooke had first cornered her, but everything had changed. The walls that once felt like a prison now felt like a stage where she'd performed the most important act of her life. The marble floors that had echoed with the footsteps of her tormentors now reflected the confident stride of someone who'd learned to walk in her own power. "Ready for this?" Spencer asked, adjusting his tie with nervous fingers. Zaria smiled, reaching over to straighten his collar with the casual intimacy of someone who'd earned the right to touch him freely. "I've been ready since the day they tried to break me." Today was the emergency school board meeting to vote on the future of Westfield's scholarship program. But unlike the last board meeting, this time Zaria wasn't fighting for survival. She was here to witness justice. The investigation triggered by her academic decathlon victory had unraveled a web of corruption that reached far beyond Westfield. Chelsea Drake's family consulting firm had been systematically sabotaging diversity programs across 3 states, collecting millions in contracts to replace failed initiatives with their proprietary assessment systems. Blake's father, Robert Brooke, had been arrested for fraud and embezzlement, his construction company's contracts with the school district cancelled amid revelations of kickbacks and inflated billing. Blake himself had been expelled from Westfield when investigators discovered 2 years' worth of purchased exam answers and forged transcripts. Chelsea had fled to her family's vacation home in the Cayman Islands, where she remained while federal prosecutors built their case. Devon Sterling had cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for immunity, his testimony revealing the full scope of the conspiracy. But the most satisfying revelation had come when MIT's president Dr. Cynthia Louis personally called to invite Zaria to campus. "Miss Ellis," she'd said during the video conference, "we've been following your situation with great interest. Your refusal to accept conditional admission based on silencing your excellence was exactly the kind of principled stand MIT should have supported from the beginning. We'd like to offer you not just full admission, but our presidential scholarship for academic courage." Zaria had accepted graciously, though she couldn't resist adding, "I hope you understand that I have no intention of becoming more humble about my capabilities." Dr. Louis had laughed, the first genuine laugh Zaria had heard from an adult in months. "Miss Ellis, we're counting on it." Now, walking into the packed boardroom, Zaria felt the weight of every gaze tracking her movement. But instead of the hostile scrutiny she'd faced 3 months ago, she saw respect, curiosity, and something that looked suspiciously like awe. The scholarship students sat together in the front row, no longer hiding in the back like guilty secrets. Jessica had been accepted to Stanford with a full ride. Dan was heading to Harvard. Carmen had chosen Princeton. All of them were finally free to claim their achievements without apologizing for their existence. The first item on tonight's agenda, Interim Board Chair Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne announced, is the formal reinstatement and expansion of the Westfield Diversity Scholarship Program. The vote was unanimous, a stark contrast to the contentious meetings that had nearly destroyed the program months earlier. But Zaria knew the real victory wasn't in the board's decision. It was in the 11 brilliant students who would never again doubt their right to excel. Additionally, Dr. Hawthorne continued, the board would like to formally apologize to Miss Zaria Ellis and all affected scholarship students for the institutional failures that led to this crisis. The apology was everything Zaria had once dreamed of hearing and less than she'd thought it would be. Words couldn't undo the damage that had been done, couldn't restore the months of sleep lost to anxiety, couldn't heal the stress that had hospitalized her grandmother. But they were a beginning. After the meeting, the scholarship students gathered in the school parking lot for what had become their traditional celebration. cheap pizza and expensive dreams shared under fluorescent lights. So what's next for the famous Zariah Ellis? Carmen asked, tossing a pizza crust at her with affectionate irreverence. MIT in the fall, Zariah replied. Triple major in mathematics, computer science, and social justice. I'm going to build algorithms that make systems more equitable instead of more biased. And after that, Jessica pressed. Change the world, Zariah said simply, and no one laughed because they all believed she would. Spencer's hand found hers across the concrete picnic table, their fingers intertwining with the easy comfort of two people who'd learned to trust each other through fire. Their relationship had been rebuilt slowly, carefully, on a foundation of complete honesty and shared purpose. He'd transferred to a different school rather than benefit from his family's connections at Westfield. His stepmother Sophia had been cleared of wrongdoing in the investigation and had become one of the scholarship program's strongest advocates. But Spencer had chosen to forge his own path, earning admission to Berkeley on his own merit. Long-distance relationships are hard, he'd said when he got his acceptance letter. Good thing we're both brilliant, Zariah had replied. We'll figure it out. As the evening wound down and students began heading home, Zariah found herself alone with Spencer under the parking lot lights that had once seemed harsh and unforgiving but now felt warm and protective. Any regrets? He asked, the question they'd both been avoiding. Zariah considered it seriously. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of media attention, legal proceedings, and college visits. She'd given interviews to major newspapers, been featured on educational podcasts, and received speaking invitations from universities across the country. But she'd also dealt with death threats from people who saw her as a symbol of everything they hated about changing demographics. She'd watched her grandmother struggle with the stress of public attention and medical bills. She'd seen how her story had been used by various political groups to advance agendas she didn't necessarily support. No regrets about fighting, she said finally. But I regret how much it cost other people. My grandmother shouldn't have been hospitalized because I decided to be brave. You shouldn't have had to choose between family and conscience. Spencer stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. Your grandmother is proud of you. My family needed to face their complicity. And I needed to learn the difference between loyalty and enabling. Still, Zariah sighed, part of me wonders what would have happened if I'd just stayed quiet. Taken the scholarship, kept my head down, graduated peacefully. You would have been miserable, Spencer said with absolute certainty. And 12 other brilliant students would have lost their chance because the program would have been quietly dismantled anyway. You don't know that. I know you, he said, cupping her face in his hands. I know that hiding your light doesn't protect anyone, it just makes the world darker. The kiss that followed tasted like possibility and pizza grease and the kind of love that chose truth over comfort every single time. When they broke apart, Zariah's phone buzzed with a notification. An email from a high school student in Detroit. * Miss Ellis, I saw your interview on CNN. I'm a junior on a diversity scholarship, and my school is trying to force me out of advanced classes because they say I'm not ready. After reading about your story, I decided to fight. Thank you for showing me that brilliant black girls don't have to apologize for taking up space. ***. The message was followed by dozens of others, students from across the country who'd found courage in her refusal to be diminished. Young people who were demanding better treatment, claiming their achievements, refusing to accept limitations imposed by other people's discomfort with their excellence. Look, she showed Spencer the messages, watching his face transform with understanding. This is why you couldn't stay quiet, he said. This is why it was worth the cost. Zariah leaned against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, thinking about the girl she'd been 3 months ago, frightened, isolated, desperate to remain invisible. That girl had been protecting herself from a world that wanted to tear her down. This woman, the one who stood in parking lots reading messages from students she'd inspired, she was protecting everyone who came after her. Her phone rang, and her grandmother's name appeared on the screen. Baby girl. Naya's voice was warm with affection and stronger than it had been in months. I just saw the news about the board meeting. How do you feel? Tired, Zariah admitted. But good. Really good. I'm proud of you, her grandmother said simply. Not for winning or fighting or any of that. I'm proud of you for becoming exactly who you were meant to be. After the call ended, Zariah stood in the parking lot where her journey had effectively begun, surrounded by the evidence of how far she'd traveled. The scholarship program was stronger than ever. The students who'd been dismissed as unworthy had proven their excellence beyond question. The systems that had tried to silence them were being rebuilt with their voices at the center. But the most important victory was invisible to everyone except Zarya herself. She was no longer afraid of her own brilliance. "Ready to go?" Spencer asked, jingling his car keys. "Almost," Zarya sighed. She pulled out her phone and opened her social media, typing a message she'd been composing in her heart for months. Asterisk to every student who's been told you don't belong in advanced classes, elite schools, or spaces of excellence. You were wrong about your limitations, and they were wrong about your potential. Claim your brilliance. Demand your seat at the table. Refuse to apologize for being exceptional. The world needs your mind exactly as it is, sharp, uncompromising, and unashamed. Don't let them dim your light to make others comfortable. Shine anyway. #brilliant and unashamed asterisk. She hit post and immediately watched the likes and shares begin climbing, each notification representing another young person who was learning to refuse diminishment. As they walked toward Spencer's car, Zarya caught sight of her reflection in the school's windows, no longer the frightened girl who'd tried to make herself invisible, but a young woman who'd learned to take up exactly as much space as her dreams required. The future stretched ahead of her like an equation waiting to be solved, full of variables she couldn't predict and constants she could count on. Mit in the fall. Algorithms that could make the world more fair. Love that chose truth over comfort. A generation of students who would demand better because she'd shown them it was possible. "What are you thinking about?" Spencer asked as they drove through the quiet streets of their small city. "Everything," Zarya sighed, watching the lights of her hometown fade in the rearview mirror. "And nothing. And how sometimes the thing you're most afraid of becomes the thing that saves you." "Being brilliant. Being seen as brilliant," she corrected. "I was so afraid that if people really saw how smart I was, they'd find ways to tear me down. But hiding was slowly killing me. Sometimes you have to risk everything to save yourself." As they pulled into her driveway, Zarya realized that her story wasn't ending. It was transforming from a story about survival into one about transformation. From a girl who apologized for her excellence to a woman who demanded the world make room for her truth. The cost had been real and painful and ongoing. But the alternative, a life spent dimming her own light, had been unthinkable. She thought about the 3 middle schoolers who would start at Westfield in the fall, inheriting a scholarship program strengthened by struggle. About the messages flooding her phone from students who'd found courage in her refusal to accept limitation. About the algorithms she would build and the systems she would change and the barriers she would demolish. Most of all, she thought about the little girl who'd hidden her intelligence behind quiet compliance, and the woman who now walked through the world unafraid to be exactly as brilliant as she was. That transformation, irreversible and complete, was worth everything she'd endured to achieve it. As she kissed Spencer goodnight and walked toward her front door, Zarya smiled at the realization that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to defend her right to excellence, new chances to light the way for others. She was ready for all of it. After all, she was brilliant. And she was done apologizing for it. What did this story teach you about claiming your own brilliance and refusing to dim your light for others' comfort? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.